Well, we're going to Acts 20. The reason we're doing that is because we just got out of 2 Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians was about the contribution to the church in Jerusalem. And now that that contribution's completed, Paul went back through Corinth on his way back and picked up that contribution. And now he's trying to get that contribution back to Jerusalem. So, and of course, it's not going to go so well for him in Jerusalem this time. So, that's kind of where we're at. So Paul is taking this money back. The uproar had ceased. Said, when his Lord takes leave of them, he led to go to Macedonia. When he had gone through the districts to give much exhortation, he came to Greece. And there he spent 3 months, which is where he wrote Romans. During those 3 months, he wrote Romans. And that was in Corinth. Plot was found against him by the Jews. He was about to set sail for Syria. He decided to return through Macedonia, and he was accompanied by these men. So there's a reason that Luke says this. Of course, we're back in Acts. Got to shift gears. You know, we're not in Paul anymore. We're not in Corinthians. Luke is a lot more historical, a lot more, he's more of our historian, right? The Gentile writer Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, wrote Acts. More of a historian. His writing's different. More in order, more to the fact, what's going on, factual, not so much, you know, the type of writing that Paul would give you or Peter would give you, more factual writing, more of an historical point of view. So, you know, he goes to this, and these men are with him, right? Why does he have all these men with him? Money, right? Can't send a bank wire, Keith, right? Those days. So when you had a large contribution or a large amount of money, you had to pack it. So that was dangerous. That was a dangerous thing to carry a lot of money. One reason Paul decided to take the route he did. One reason he's going to go by the sea. One reason I think he wanted the Ephesian elders to come to him and meet him at the coast instead of traveling inland to Ephesus was because he had this money. And he was concerned about this money and getting this money back to the church in Jerusalem. So these men were there because, well, they were representatives of places who had donated money, but also that was a group. You know, you're safer in a group, right? Safer in a crowd. So, so there was a lot of security involved in this. He's trying to get back to Jerusalem. He's trying to carry this money back to Jerusalem. And so he has all these guys that are going with him. And then we were going to Troas, right? And we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread and came to Troas within 5 days. Now, Troas is where he went on the way out, that he was going to try to meet Titus, and that didn't work out. And now he's back at Troas on the way coming the other direction now. He's going back towards Jerusalem now. So he's at Troas. He's going to do most of this by sea, not by land, once again, because he has a lot of money. And it's a lot safer being on a ship with money than it is trying to travel over land. You know, we all know the story of the Good Samaritan, right? The guy got beat up by robbers and everything taken from him. So you know, it wasn't real safe. There were robbers, there were people along the road, so it wasn't real safe to go with money like that. So he's going to mostly do this trip by sea back to Jerusalem. And so he comes to Troas, and when he comes to Troas, he's going to stay there for a certain number of days. After the days of unleavened bread. So what does that mean? What's the days of unleavened bread? Passover, right? Jews ate unleavened bread at Passover. So it's after Passover. So it's after Passover. He's on his way back to Jerusalem. And it says we stayed in Troas 5 days. We stayed 7 days. And on the first day of the week, and we were gathered together to break bread. So this is a passage we use a lot when we talk about one of the first examples in the Bible of the church meeting on the first day of the week as opposed to the Sabbath. A time that we take, and we know that, and historically we know that continued on past this time. So it's one of those passages we look at. Of course, there's other passages in Corinthians that says lay by on the first day of the week as you've prospered. Other place, you know, that's another place we see that. It's not all over, you know. It's one of those things that it's not everywhere. But we know historically that early Christians met on the first day of the week. I mean, that's a very established historical fact. That's not something that I'm just sitting up here telling you. It's a very established historical fact. The early church met on the first day of the week. So, and especially once Jerusalem was destroyed, Judaism kind of ceased to be an issue. The Sabbath kind of fell out of popularity. The Jews become a lot less influential. There were more Gentile Christians than Jewish Christians. The church went to the Gentiles. Church goes to Spain. Church goes to Rome. Sabbath doesn't mean anything to Gentiles at all, so it's irrelevant to them whether they meet on the Sabbath. The Sabbath never meant anything to the Gentiles. They could care less whether it was a Sabbath or not. So that was irrelevant to them. Church started on the first day of the week. Day of Pentecost is 50. Penny means 50, 50 days after Passover Sabbath. So Pentecost was the first day of the week. The church was established on the first day of the week. Jesus rose from the tomb on the first day of the week. The early church met on the first day of the week. Historically, we know that. Biblically, we know that. It's not really a thing, not really an issue. It's just a fact. So that's one reason we meet on the first day of the week to this day instead of meeting on the Sabbath, because that is when Christians met. So this is just another example, another place that you see that. In the Greek in this text, this is a text I've looked at an awful lot of my life. So in the Greek in this text, it's the breaking of the bread. Definite article in the Greek, and whenever you see that, it means communion. So that wasn't a meal. They were coming together on the first day of the week, not to preach, not to sing, not to pray. In this instance, primary reason they came together on the first day of the week was to take communion. So that was the primary reason they gathered. Paul waited because he knew they would gather on that day because that was the day they gathered. So it's a pretty redundant argument. So that's why he was there. That's why he waited. He wanted to meet with them. He knew that was the time to wait with them. There's a lot of things in this passage that we kind of got to sort through. There's a lot of speculation. Was this Jewish time? Was this Roman time? What would we consider the first day of the week? If we're on a Jewish time, then of course the first day of the week would have been sundown on Saturday night. Would have been the beginning of the first day of the week. Most scholars think this is Roman time, when that Roman time is more like our time. It was more like a midnight to midnight thing, not a sundown to sundown thing. So there's speculation here. First day of the week, weekends didn't mean anything to them in those days. Weekends were irrelevant. You didn't work 5 days and get off 2. There wasn't a 40-hour work week. That was stuff that's in your head, but trust me, first century Christians had no clue what that meant. They just knew every day was a work day, and when the sun came up, you went to work. So chances are, whenever he met, this was in an evening after the work was done. This probably would have been on an evening. Take it, if you're on Jewish time, it would have been on a Saturday evening. If you're on Roman time, it would have been on a Sunday evening. In our way of thinking, but you kind of got to put yourself in a first century setting and not a 21st, 22nd, whatever we're in setting, because weekends didn't mean to them what weekends mean to me and you. That's all I'm telling you, right? Right. It's kind of an irrelevant, yeah, right. If it was Jewish time, then they would have done this on Saturday night. If it was Roman time, they would have done this it would have been Sunday night. Right, and daylight would have been Monday morning. If it was on Jewish time, then the daylight would have still been the first day of the week. Really, I've looked at it 2 or 3 different ways, and I don't think it matters. I just don't think it matters. Right, So I think it's a real strong passage, and I think and the reason I say that, and I think you really got to think about Luke, because Luke, he's not the same writer as the rest of the Bible. He's not that guy, Luke is real factual, real. He's real chronological. He's real factual to the point. He's historical. So when Luke says they met on the first day of the week, it's just a fact. It's not. He's not debating it. He's not arguing. It's just a fact. It's just when it happened. And that's one thing you got to remember about Luke. Luke's just relating the facts. He's not embellishing upon them. He's not setting his own agenda upon them or his own theology upon them. Luke's just saying, this is how it is. And that's one thing you got to remember when you read Acts. He's just telling you how it is, right? And that's exactly what Luke does. Paul began talking, intending to leave the next day, which most people believe, most scholars believe. However you look at this, would have been Monday. He prolonged his message until midnight, and no, he did not start at 11:40. So let's not even go there. Huh? 11:36. Yeah, the traditional 20-minute sermon, right? So he started at 11:40 and preached till midnight. No, so Paul's preaching till he preached till midnight. That's right. They did. One fell asleep. So one anyway, maybe more than one. One fell out the window, right? There are many lamps where they were gathered together. Not uncommon to be in the upper room. Nothing significant about that. Most everybody met in the upper room. Animals were in the lower. So that was real common in that part of the country, part of the world. But he said that not because, like I said, Luke's just historical. And the reason he said they were in the upper room is because he wanted you to know how Eutychus fell out and broke his neck. Right? I mean, that's how come he says that. It has nothing to do with in the upper room. That's just the fact. And he's telling you that because the fact is he fell far enough that he broke his neck. He wanted you to know he was dead, right? Where we were. Mm-hmm. Well, Luke's inclusive. I think I looked at that, and I can't remember what my conclusion was. But, yeah, Young's Literal says they. Luke's including himself in this, and he does that in places and acts like he was present. Now, that's, I guess, a matter of debate. Luke wasn't always present for the things Luke recorded. But Luke did travel with Paul, so that is a possibility. Yeah, I think I looked at that one time too, but I can't remember what it was. It does. Yeah, and that's one thing where King James is better at King James is better sometimes at taking a literal interpretation of like gender and like pronouns and stuff. King James is a little better sometimes at taking a more literal stance than other translations are. So, and I did look at that once before, but I'd have to look at it again to tell you. But yeah, that is right. King James does speak different there. Oh, it says, he fell, was picked up dead. Paul went down and fell upon him, and after embracing him, he said, "Do not be troubled, for his life is in him." Very similar to Old Testament Ezekiel laying himself over the body of the boy, the Shunammite widow's son. When he had gone back up and had broken the bread and eaten. Now, see, that's a different, and in the Greek, that word like eaten, broken the bread and eaten, that's like tasting it in the Greek. So it's like, that's the meal. In other words, this wasn't communion now. This was a meal. So, but sometimes communion was included in the meals, as we know from the book of Jude. So, but basically it also makes the distinction between the two different things. One was communion and one was a meal. So whether they were included together or inclusive or not, I don't have the answer to that question. Well, like if you look at Corinthians and Jude, yeah, but right. But they still separate it from the meal, and I think that's right. I think it was at the same time, yeah. But I think that's but they always make the distinction, and I think that's one reason Paul blasted them in Corinth, is you're not making the distinction anymore, And you had to make that distinction, and I think that was their sin in taking the Lord's Supper. Paul, in this case, like I said, it's just a very factual. They took away the boy alive, were greatly comforted. It's just a very factual account. Paul meeting there, good New Testament example, apostolistic example of meeting on the first day of the week. So we try to follow those examples to the best of our ability. So that's one reason that we do that. And it's just a really good account of that. Someplace we go a lot and we talk about this. Are there any other comments? Paul, Paul, in this case, it was, it kind of gives you an idea that, these Christians were pretty scattered. They weren't just, they probably would come in from quite a ways. They weren't just in, if they hadn't been like scattered out, Paul could have probably tried to meet with them or tried to have done something. But it kind of gives you the idea this is a fairly big congregation of Christians, doesn't it? They met in an upper room. They seem to be pretty, we always talk about house churches in the New Testament, how most churches were house churches. The majority of churches were house churches. But this seems to be a little bigger. This seems to be a bigger thing. Upper room could have been a house, but it seems to kind of be a bigger gathering. Seems like these people were further spread apart. I think there's a lot of things that go into play here. Paul delayed in order just to see them. There was a purpose in Paul doing that. He wanted to speak to them. He wanted to take time to do it. He was in a hurry to get back to Jerusalem. You can see that throughout this text. Paul was definitely in a hurry to get back, but he took this time. But now as we start talking about the elders in Ephesus, Paul calling for them to come out to see him, not wanting to take the time to go in to see them, which would have been about a 4-day journey, the way I understand it, 4 or 5 day journey there and back to have went into Ephesus and come back out of Ephesus. So he sent ahead for them actually to come out to meet him. Going to the ship, set sail for Assos, including from there to take Paul on board. For so he had arranged it. Once again, like Clyde was saying, real inclusive here, but and that inclusive idea, and I've looked at that. I'm sorry, I can't, something I can't pull out of my head, but, once again, Paul, or Luke giving the indication that he was involved. He was there. He was involved on this trip, going to pick Paul up. A lot of scholars think this was a ship that just sailed during the day, that Paul had got on this. It wasn't one that just went across, but it was a ship that just went out during the day and went into port at night, and out during the day and into port at night, that it just kind of hopped down the coast instead of like a voyage. So this ship was kind of in and out of port like every day. We arrived the following day opposite Chios. The next day we crossed over to Samos. That's what I mean. Luke's he's very, very much a guy that follows a timeline. He includes things. It's just a different read than the rest of the New Testament. It's just real historical read, just like you were almost writing a diary, writing what happened, which really is kind of what Luke is doing. He had decided to sail past Ephesus so he would not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hurrying to be in Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. Okay, so when we started this, it said it was just past the days of unleavened bread, and y'all said that was Passover, right? And I just told you Pentecost is how many days past Passover? 50 days, right? So a little over a month. So Paul wanted to be in Jerusalem by Pentecost. Why did he want to be in Jerusalem on Pentecost? Yeah, it was feast day, right? I mean, it was full. A lot of people. Big holiday, big day, right? Big day. So he wanted to get back. He was in a hurry, so he went past Ephesus. Didn't want to go into Asia. I think there's reasons. And that's one thing a lot of scholars really kind of get onto Luke here, because they're like, why isn't he talking more about the money? Why isn't he talking more about that donation going to Jerusalem? Why isn't Luke including that? And some scholars think, well, maybe it didn't go so well. Maybe maybe it didn't go over so well in Jerusalem, that donation of money from there, or other reasons. And I don't really think that. I think Luke didn't really say much about that because I just don't think it was that important to the story. I think it was the underlie of the story. The story is Paul. The big story in here is Paul getting back to Jerusalem where he's going to get arrested, right? I mean, that's a big focus of our story at this point. So he's very very telling you about wanting to go past Ephesus, hurrying to be in Jerusalem, and he wants to, from Miletus, he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church. This is significant, and we miss this a lot, but this is something that even scholars who don't really agree with elder-led churches agree that this is an example that early churches were elder-led, which I think is kind of a conundrum. But they really think that this church, this is a real good example that these elders were specific to the congregation. In other words, and I think the word here is episkopos, I believe, in this particular passage, if I'm thinking right. And which most of the time gets translated bishop, but they're not a bishop. What we like a lot of like early Roman Catholic, early churches, there were bishops over multitudes of congregations. There was a bishop over an area, over a multitude. This is a really good example here of elders over one congregation. You know, if you think about Asia Minor, should have put a map up there, huh? If you think about it, well, think about the book of Revelation, right? Book of Revelation, Paul writes to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, right? Smyrna, Ephesus, Pergamum, all those churches. And they're all within about a 60-mile radius of each other. So this isn't a big geographic location. So these elders at Ephesus, though, they're not over any other specific congregation. Why do you think Paul really wants to meet with the elders from Ephesus? What is it about those elders? Why doesn't he call for some of them? There's other churches there, right? What is it about Ephesus that you think is important to Paul? You know, Ephesus is a real recurring church in the Bible. And Ephesus seems to have that significance. I think it's interesting that John will wind up dying in Ephesus. The Apostle John, when he gets off his banishment of Patmos, will wind up in Ephesus. So I think that's kind of interesting. Pretty wealthy church. Paul spent a lot of time there. Timothy, when Paul wrote Timothy, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, most scholars think Timothy was probably in Ephesus. So there was a lot of significance to that congregation for Paul. That was an important congregation to him. Well, yeah, but pretty well all the churches in Asia were pretty multicultural, they were all pretty diverse. So yeah, but I think that's pretty consistent throughout Asia. But I think Ephesus was just I think it was an important church to Paul. I think he was really close to that church. And so he called those elders to meet with him. And he says, from the first day I set foot in Asia, I was with you the whole time, serving the Lord with humility, tears, and trials. You see, here, this is Paul, right? That's Paul's writing. That almost reminds you of reading 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians. But, it's still Luke. But Luke's telling you what Paul said to them, right? So that kind of, that's what Luke does. So this is like Paul, but because that's what Paul would say. And it sounds a lot like Paul's writings, but, Luke's just recounting it to us. And it's something he reiterates a lot. His humility, his lack of being a burden, his boldness in proclaiming the gospel. Those are recurring themes with Paul. I think, Paul was a preacher of the gospel, and those were important aspects to Paul of his ministry. That he was self-sufficient to a large degree, that he was bold in his speech, that he was a humble person, even though God had called him. These are recurring themes, very important things for Paul as he talks to them and tries to encourage them, knowing that he will never see them again. Well, I don't know if he knows that, but I think he does. I did not shrink from declaring, teaching publicly, solemnly testifying to Jews and Greeks of repentance towards God and faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. And now, behold, bound by the Spirit, I am on my way to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there. What does he mean, bound by the Spirit, do you think? Do you think this Jerusalem journey is more than... Right, yeah, he's got a... Yeah, he knows that things are... and of course, Agabus is going to prophesy to him the way they bind when we get down at Acts. So, he knows that this probably isn't going to go well for him. And, all his other missionary journeys, he always wound up back in Antioch. And then from Antioch, he would leave to go on another missionary journey. But this time's going to be different. And I think he senses that. He knows that this is probably his last conversation with these people. That's kind of hard, isn't it? You always think, we're really good at firsts in life. I mean, we just are, birthdays and anniversaries. Firsts are really big to us, right? That's a big thing. But, we never really keep track of lasts, do we? You ever thought about that? Lasts, I guess graduations maybe. But other than that, and those are kind of firsts, right? Because it's like starting something again. But, our life, from the day we're born, there's lasts in our life. There's a last time we'll do something, a last time we'll see somebody. I always think of my kids. I used to, I seen Grant the other day, and Ridge was like, "Go on my shoulder, on your shoulders." And, I bet I carried my kids 1,000,000 miles on my shoulders, and I can't remember the last time I put them on my shoulders. And I always kind of thought that. What was the last time that I said, "Oh, well, you're just too big now. I can't put you on my shoulders." And the other night when you were doing that, I was thinking, in my mind, I thought, I wonder what was the last time, the last day, the last step I took with one of my kids on my shoulders when I finally decided, yeah, I can't put you on my shoulders anymore. You're too big. And I think that we don't think a lot about that. But Paul was thinking that, and he was wanting to impress upon them the things that he thought would be of the most importance. I've often asked myself, what will be the last sermon I preach? And what would I want that sermon to be? I often ask myself that question. If I knew Sunday was my last sermon ever, what would I tell you? What would I preach about? I often have asked myself that question, pondering, and asked myself that question, what would I say? If it was the last time I was ever going to see you, Sunday, what would I tell you? So we don't think much. I tell you I love you. I think that'll be the most important thing. Everything else is irrelevant, right? I think we don't think much, but Paul is, and he's contemplating it, and he's saying, what do I want to say? What would I want to leave them with about me? They know me. They know who I am. What would I want to tell them? And he says, bonds and afflictions await me, like Clyde says. The Spirit has informed him that this is going to happen, and yet this is where I've got to go. Yeah. I do not consider my life of any account as dear to myself, so that I may finish my course in the ministry which I received from the Lord to testify solemnly of the gospel of the grace of God. Paul really starts to say this more towards the end of his life, the end of what he thinks will be his life. Finish the course, kept the faith, crown of righteousness, and the crown Paul talks about is a Stephanos, victor's crown, a wreath like the Greeks wore, not a diadem, which is the other word, which is a kingly crown. And the only place we see the word diadem in the Scripture is in the book of Revelation. You don't see that in any of the other places except that, because a diadem was a crown of a king. That's the crown that we would think, big king crown. And the crown Paul talks about is a victor's crown, like you would win if you won a race or event in the Olympics, what you would get. So, and he kind of alludes to that in another place in the Scripture. I know that all of you among him about preaching the kingdom will no longer see my face. So, he's pretty certain about this, right? This is it for me. This is the last. This is what I want to leave you with. Um, and so he understands that. I testify I'm innocent of the blood of all men. And he doesn't mean that he's innocent because he persecuted Christians. That's not at all what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is he's innocent of the spiritual blood of men, for I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole purpose of God. In other words, I did my part, right? I told you the gospel. I told you about God. I told you about Christ. I'm innocent. If you don't do the right thing, then, I'm innocent of it. I've done my part. It's basically what Paul's saying. I've done what I needed to do. I'm not guilty of the spiritual blood of any man because I've said what I needed to say, and if they didn't listen, that's not on me. It's on them. So Paul was real bold in that statement, and I think that's an important thing. We can't force the gospel on people. We can preach it to them. We can tell them about it, but we can't force it. We can't force people. And if people reject it, then and we've told them and they reject it, then we're no longer guilty of their blood. Now, if we don't tell them, maybe that's a different story. But if we've told them and they reject it, then it's not on us. And then he's concerned for the church and the assembly, right? That's what that word means. Ecclesia, assembly. Be on guard for yourselves, all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased. Overseers, shepherd, two different words there. Different words for elder. Shepherd is always poimen in the Greek. Same word you get in John chapter 10, Good Shepherd version of the Bible. Ephesians 4, where we get the word pastor, is actually poimen. Shepherd should be shepherd. Ephesians 4:11 should be shepherd, not pastor. The only place in the Bible you get the word pastor, but really a transliterated, poor translation. The word is simply shepherd, and shepherd in the Bible always refers to, in this case, refers to the same office of the bishop or overseer. So episkopos, word episkopos here, but poimen, shepherd the church, which he purchased with his own blood. I think that really exemplifies what an elder's supposed to do, and a lot of churches call elders shepherds, and I mean that's okay. But I think shepherd is the description, and elder is the name, in my opinion. Shepherd's more descriptive, and elder's really what they are. The Bible really doesn't to shepherd the church or shepherds of the church. Shepherd would lay down his life for the sheep. Jesus says in John. I think that's what an elder should do: lay down his life for the sheep. Guard the sheep, guard the flock, which is exactly what Paul is alluding to here when he calls them shepherds. Your job is to guard the flock. And what are you guarding the flock against? What's going to damage the flock? Huh? Yeah, perversion. What? Wolves. Why does he say wolves? What do wolves do to sheep? Yep, they eat them up, don't they? Right. That was a big enemy, right? Wolves that come in among the flock. Who do wolves get in the flock? The strong or the weak? Right? Elders' job is to protect the weak, more so probably than the strong. And I think that makes an elder's job a lot harder because the weak are always harder to shepherd than the strong. It's just back to life. But that's an elder's job, Then the weak are the ones the wolves are going to get. Savage wolves, not sparing the flock. From among your own selves men will arise, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. So there's danger without and there's danger within in the church, right? There's danger without and there's danger within. And probably the danger within is greater than the danger without, I would say, as a rule. Perverse teachings, perverting the gospel. So I think that's something that Paul alludes to here. Draw away disciples after them. Be on the alert that night and day for 3 years I did not cease to admonish each one with tears. And now I commend you to God, to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I have coveted no man's silver or gold or clothes, and you yourselves know these hands ministered to my own needs to the men who were with me. Paul, like I said, another big focus of Paul's ministry was not being a burden, not being burdensome. And he set himself apart from other people that he traveled with because of that. I show by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak. Once again, I go right back to what I said. The weak are the ones that you're going to lose first. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus, more blessed to give than to receive. Jesus never said that specifically, but he did say it non-specifically, right? So it's kind of interesting. It's in a quote, and really that quote doesn't exist, but you know, Jesus did. Well, but Paul wasn't with Jesus, right? So if he told it to Paul, he had to have done it through the Spirit, right? And because Paul never traveled with Jesus. Paul never knew Jesus in the flesh, I don't guess. But he did teach the principle. They embraced him, kissed him, grieved especially over the word. They would not see his face. They were accompanying him to the ship. So Paul is on his way to Jerusalem. We'll pick it up on 22 come Sunday morning. I timed that perfect. Ha! Thanks for your time.